The late afternoon sun painted the small courtyard in hues of amber and gold. I stood at the gate, clutching my worn-out travel bag, the same one my husband had bought decades ago when we first moved into our home. My eyes welled up as I looked at the house that once echoed with laughter, the same house I'd given to my son when he married. I had nowhere else to go. After my husband's death, I'd stayed in the village for a few years, but age had caught up with me. The nights were colder, the silence louder. So I gathered my courage and came to the city, hoping my son, Rohan, would let me stay for a while. When the door opened, I smiled faintly. My son's face lit up for a moment, but it faded quickly. Before he could speak, a sharp voice echoed from behind him. "Why is that old leech here? We don't have space." It was Priya, my daughter-in-law. The word struck me harder than any slap could. Rohan looked between us, guilt and confusion clouding his eyes. "Priya, she's my mother," he said softly. Priya crossed her arms. "And this is our house. We barely have enough room for ourselves. Where will she stay, Rohan? On the balcony." I lowered my gaze. I didn't want to cause trouble. "It's all right," I said quietly. "I can find a small place nearby. I just wanted to see you both." But Rohan's conscience wouldn't let her words go unanswered. "She'll stay here," he said firmly. "We'll manage." Priya huffed and stormed into the kitchen, muttering under her breath. I stood frozen at the threshold. The same house that once felt like home now seemed colder than ever. Rohan cleared a small space in the storeroom for me, a room filled with old boxes and unused furniture. He put a thin mattress on the floor and an old sheet for me to sleep on. "Just for a few days, Ma," he whispered, avoiding my eyes. I smiled weakly. "Don't worry, Beta. I'll manage." At night, I lay there listening to the muffled sound of their laughter from the living room. Priya's laughter, my son's laughter. I should have felt happy that he was content. But my heart ached in the silence. The next morning, I woke early and made tea, just like I used to. I hoped maybe they'd sit with me for a few minutes, like old times. When Rohan came out, he smiled at the sight of the steaming cups. But before he could take a sip, Priya's voice came from behind him. "Rohan, don't drink that. You'll be late for work. I already made coffee." He hesitated, then placed the cup down and walked away. The tea went cold on the table. I sat quietly, staring at the fading steam, realizing how quickly people's habits and hearts change. The only one who smiled at me was their daughter, little Aditi, my granddaughter. She was 6, with bright eyes and an even brighter heart. "Daddy, why do you sleep in the storeroom?" she asked innocently one evening. I smiled. "Because I like quiet places, Beta." She giggled. "Then I'll come play quietly with you." And she did. Every evening after school, she'd sneak in with her crayons and stories. Together, we laughed and drew on old newspapers. Her laughter filled my empty room with light. One evening, while helping Priya with the laundry, I accidentally dropped one of her expensive bangles. It cracked slightly. "I told you not to touch my things," she yelled. "Do you know how much that cost?" "I'm sorry, Beta," I whispered. "I was just trying to help." Rohan came home later and saw me sitting quietly in my room, holding the broken piece of glass. He asked what happened, but I shook my head. "Nothing, Beta. Just old hands that don't work like they used to." He sighed, rubbed my shoulder gently, and left. For the first time I realized he saw everything, but he said nothing. One night, Aditi whispered, "Dottie, Mama said you'll go back soon. Is that true?" I hesitated. "Maybe, Beta. Would you miss me if I did?" Her little face crumpled. "Of course. Who will tell me bedtime stories?" I hugged her tightly, feeling her heartbeat against mine. I didn't want her to grow up thinking that love had limits, that family could be temporary. "Don't worry," I said softly. "Even if I go, I'll always be in your stories." A week later, I fainted while sweeping the floor. When I opened my eyes, I was in a hospital bed. Rohan stood nearby, worry etched on his face. "The doctor says you're weak," he said. "You need rest." Priya stood at the door, arms crossed. "Rest where? We can't turn our house into a hospital ward." I turned my face away. "Take me back to the village, Rohan. I'll be fine there." He looked torn, but before he could answer, Aditi burst into tears. "No, Dottie stays with me." Even the nurse looked uncomfortable. That night, Rohan silently paid the bill. But I knew the cost was more than just money. It was another crack in our already fragile family. When I returned home, I sat quietly in my corner, flipping through an old diary I had brought with me. A diary full of recipes, poems, and dreams I had once written. Aditi found it and asked, "Dottie, what's this?" "It's my story," I said with a smile. She flipped through it eagerly, fascinated. Later that evening, she showed it to her mother. "Mama, look, Dottie used to write." Priya barely glanced at it. "That's nice, sweetheart. Now put it away." But that night, I caught Rohan sitting by my bed, reading the diary quietly. He looked up, eyes glistening. "Ma, you wrote all this?" I nodded. "A long time ago, before life became about surviving." He smiled sadly. "I forgot. You had dreams, too." The next morning, while I was watering the plants in the balcony, a familiar voice called my name. It was Mira, my childhood friend, whom I hadn't seen in 20 years. She looked at me, shocked. "Anita, you look so thin. What happened to you?" I smiled. "Just getting old, that's all." But when she saw where I lived, the small storeroom, the worn-out bed, her eyes filled with tears. "This is not how you should live, my friend." She came inside and greeted Rohan warmly. "You don't remember me, do you? I used to feed you ladoos when you were 5. Rohan smiled politely, but Priya stood at a distance, expression unreadable. When Mira left, she whispered to me, "I'll come again soon." Don't worry, that night, I wondered what she meant by that. The next week, Mira came again, carrying a box of sweets and a warmth my home had long forgotten. "Anita," she said softly, "our old school runs a charity trust now. We help senior citizens who need a home, not a shelter, a home. Why don't you come stay there?" I smiled weakly. "I can't leave, Mira. This is my son's house." She sighed. "A house isn't always a home, my friend." Her words lingered long after she left. That night, while everyone was asleep, I sat by the window, thinking. The streetlights flickered like old memories, faint, but still alive. For the first time, I wondered if love sometimes meant leaving quietly, not staying and breaking piece by piece. A week later, it was Aditi's 7th birthday. The house was full of balloons, laughter, and guests. Priya had planned every detail perfectly, from the cake to the decorations. I stayed in my room, listening to the sounds of celebration. I didn't want to intrude, but when Aditi came running in, her dress glittering with sequins, she said, "Dottie, you promised to tell a story at my birthday." Before I could respond, Priya appeared. Aditi, let Daddy rest, okay? She's tired. But Mama, she promised. Rohan hesitated. Maybe just one short story, Priya. Priya forced a smile. Fine. So I stepped out. The children gathered around, and I began telling an old folk tale about a sparrow who built her nest in a storm. The room fell silent. Even the adults listened. When I finished, the kids clapped. Aditi hugged me tightly and whispered, "Best story ever." But when I looked up, I caught Priya's eyes. There was something there, guilt or maybe realization, before she quickly turned away. The next morning, I woke up early to the smell of incense. Rohan was standing by the small temple in the living room, eyes closed, praying. I waited for him to finish. You remember your father's death anniversary today? He nodded. I almost forgot, Ma. Priya's been busy with work and Aditi's school. I smiled faintly. That's okay, Beta. I'll light the lamp. As I did, I remembered my husband's words. Never let love become a burden, Anita. It should lift hearts, not weigh them down. When I turned, Rohan was watching me silently. You've been patient, Ma, he said. More than I deserve. I didn't answer. Sometimes, silence says everything. Later that day, while cleaning, I found an old photo album, dusty but still intact. It had pictures of our family when Rohan was little, Priya smiling brightly as a new bride, and Aditi as a baby. I placed the album on the table, hoping they'd look at it together that evening. But when Priya came home, she barely noticed. Why is all this junk lying around? She said, brushing past it. That night, I saw Aditi flipping through the album alone. Mama looks so happy here, she whispered. I smiled sadly. Yes, Beta. That's what love looked like, when we still remembered it. A sudden rainstorm hit the city one night. Thunder rattled the windows, and the electricity went out. I was alone in my room when I heard Aditi crying. She was afraid of thunder. I grabbed a candle and went to her room. Daddy, she cried, hugging me tight. It's so loud. I smiled and told her the same story I'd told Rohan when he was little, about how the thunder was just the sky's way of clapping for the rain. Slowly, she fell asleep in my arms. When I looked up, I saw Priya standing in the doorway. She said nothing, but for the first time she didn't look angry, just thoughtful. The next morning, Priya made tea, 2 cups. She brought one to my room. I made you some, she said awkwardly. I was surprised. Thank you, Beta. She nodded, lingering by the door. I didn't mean to be harsh before. It's just, life's been busy. I smiled gently. We all say things we don't mean when we're tired. Don't worry, but when she left, I realized sometimes the apology that's half said can heal more than one that's rehearsed. Still, I sensed something shifting. Maybe the cracks in her heart were finally letting some light in. A few days later, Mira visited again. She handed me an envelope. Just in case, she said softly. Our senior home is peaceful, near the lake, full of people your age. If things ever get too heavy here, come. I nodded and slipped the envelope under my pillow. That evening, I wrote a letter, not a complaint, not a goodbye, but a thank you. Dear Rohan and Priya, thank you for letting me stay. I know it wasn't easy. You have your own life to live. Don't feel guilty if I choose to go. Just promise me you'll raise Aditi with kindness and love. Ma. I folded it and kept it in my diary. The next morning, I left quietly. I didn't want tears or scenes, only peace. I took my small bag my diary, and the envelope Mira gave me. I looked back once, at the balcony, at Aditi's window, at the home I once built with dreams, and then walked away. When Rohan woke up, the house felt unusually quiet. He called for me, but there was no answer. On my bed, he found my letter. Priya stood behind him, reading over his shoulder. Her hands trembled. "She left because of us," she whispered. Rohan sat down heavily, eyes filling with regret. "No, Priya. She left because we forgot what she meant to us." Weeks passed. The house felt emptier than ever. Aditi often asked, "When is Dottie coming back?" Priya couldn't answer. She had started keeping the house neater, cooking simple meals the way I used to, lighting incense by the temple every morning. She'd learned to notice the small silences and what they meant. One day, Mira visited them. "She's doing well," she told them. "Peaceful. But she misses you all." Rohan looked down. "We miss her too." Mira smiled faintly. "Then go tell her that, before regret becomes your new house guest." It was a bright Sunday when they finally arrived at the senior home by the lake. The garden was blooming with marigolds, and birds sang in the trees. I was sitting on a bench, knitting, when I saw them, Rohan, Priya, and little Aditi running toward me. "Daddy!" Aditi shouted, throwing her arms around me. "We came to take you home." I smiled softly. "But I am home, Beta." Rohan knelt beside me. "Ma, I'm sorry. For everything. You shouldn't have had to leave." Priya's eyes filled with tears. "I was wrong, Ma. I thought space meant walls and rooms. But it's the heart that didn't have space, not the house." I touched her hand gently. "Now you understand." They begged me to return, but I hesitated. This place is peaceful. But I'll visit often. And maybe, someday, when the house feels like a home again, I'll come back. Aditi held my hand tightly. "Promise?" I smiled. "Promise." As they left, Rohan looked back at me, and this time his eyes held the love I had waited years to see. The wind rustled the marigolds, and I whispered to myself, sometimes love returns, not because it's asked to, but because it finally understands where it belongs.